"You look tired, sir." The voice was tiny, soft like the flutter of a sparrow's wing, but clear enough to cut through the CEO's storm of thoughts. Daniel Mercer lifted his weary eyes from the stack of documents balanced on his lap. Beside him, in the cramped economy seat he had reluctantly agreed to take after a last-minute booking, sat a small girl with curly hair, dangling feet, and an earnest gaze that seemed far too observant for her age. "I'm fine," Daniel muttered, adjusting his tie, though even he didn't believe it. His company was collapsing under a scandal he hadn't seen coming. His board was panicking. Investors were fleeing. And now, of all days, he was trapped on a 6-hour flight to Chicago, in economy, next to a child who saw straight through him. But the little girl continued studying him with a seriousness that made him oddly self-conscious. "My mom says people who say they're fine are usually not fine." Daniel blinked. Who was this kid? Before he could respond, she opened a coloring book on her lap and held out a crayon. "Here, you can borrow this. Blue helps when you're sad." He nearly laughed. Something he hadn't done in weeks. Why blue? Because the sky is blue. And airplanes stay up because the sky hold them. She paused, lowering her voice. "Maybe it can hold you too." Her words were strangely comforting, disarming, even. He took the crayon, twirling it between his fingers, unsure what to say. The humming of the engines filled the silence between them. "What's your name?" he finally asked. "Lila," she said proudly. "And you're?" "Daniel." "That's a nice name." She went back to coloring, but continued speaking. "My teacher says names carry meaning. My name means night. That's why I like lights. They make the night less scary." He stared at her profile, the innocence, the calmness, and felt something shift inside him. A strange warmth, something he had forgotten existed. "Why are you traveling alone?" he asked, noticing she had no parent nearby. "Oh, I'm not alone. My mom is up there." She pointed toward the front rows. But the man sitting next to her didn't want to switch seats. He said he paid extra, and I should be a big girl. She shrugged. "It's okay. I like meeting new people." Something tightened in Daniel's chest. He thought of all the times he had used similar dismissive lines in boardrooms. The flight attendant came by with water, and Lila thanked her shyly. When the attendant looked at Daniel, she paused. "Sir, are you all right? You look pale." Before he could answer, Lila leaned forward. "He's tired, but he's going to feel better soon." The attendant smiled, amused. "Well, I hope so." Daniel exhaled, feeling the tension in his shoulders slowly unraveling. "What makes you think I'll feel better?" he asked the girl. Lila tapped her chest. "Because I can hear your heart." "My heart?" he echoed, surprised. She nodded. "It sounds loud, like it's fighting something. But fighting means it hasn't given up yet." He swallowed. No adult had spoken to him with this level of unfiltered truth in years. Maybe ever. "You're very wise," he said quietly. "I'm 8, she said. "People say that's not old, but 8 years is still a lot of sunsets." A laugh escaped him this time, soft but real. He leaned back, letting her words sink into the spaces his stress had hollowed out. The plane continued to climb, and with every passing minute he felt lighter, as if altitude was peeling away layers he didn't need anymore. Lila resumed coloring with intense focus, occasionally glancing at him as though checking if he was still breathing properly. And somehow, her presence alone steadied him. After a while, she asked, "What do you do?" "You look like someone who makes big decisions." He hesitated. "I'm a CO." Her eyes widened. "That's like the boss of everything?" "Something like that," he murmured. "Then why do you look scared?" Her question sliced straight through him. He searched for a lie, found none, and finally whispered, "Because things are falling apart." Lila considered this. Then she tore a page from her coloring book and handed it to him. A drawing of a sky full of uneven clouds but a bright sun bursting through. "This is for you," she said. "My teacher says when you feel like things are falling apart, sometimes they're really falling into place. Maybe your son is hiding right now, but it's there." Daniel stared at the drawing as something inside him cracked open. Something old. Something he had buried beneath ambition, pressure, and the weight of 1,000 expectations. The drawing trembled slightly in his hands. He hadn't realized he was shaking. Lila scooted closer, resting her small hand on his arm. "Don't worry. Night never wins forever." He closed his eyes, breathing deep for the first time in weeks, letting her words wash over him like a promise he desperately needed. The plane leveled out, and clouds drifted beneath them like floating worlds. Lila hummed softly, a tune he didn't recognize, but it soothed him, pulling him out of the storm inside him. Daniel opened his eyes and looked at the little girl, the stranger who somehow saw him clearer than people who had known him for years. And just as he began to wonder who she really was, she turned him again and said, And just as he began to wonder who she really was, she turned him again and said, "My mom says people who get quiet like that are remembering something important." Daniel's breath caught. He wasn't sure whether she was guessing, or reading him like an open book. Either way, she wasn't wrong. Memories he'd locked away for years were surfacing. Late nights in his tiny apartment. His mother bringing him tea, telling him he was stronger than the world believed. Her voice had been the anchor that kept him grounded. But in chasing success, he had drifted far from who he once was. "What are you remembering?" Lila asked softly. "A time," he said slowly, "when life felt simpler, when I wasn't living inside a storm." She nodded as though she understood perfectly. Storms don't stay forever, even the big ones. My grandma says storms teach trees how strong they are. He wondered how many people this child had healed with senses like these. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane began to cruise smoothly. A quiet lull settled between them, but it was a kind of silence that didn't demand to be filled. Daniel found himself studying her. The confidence with which she spoke, the strange mixture of innocence and wisdom, the brightness in her eyes that seemed untouched by the world's sharp edges. "You travel a lot?" he asked, more to hear her voice again than anything. She shook her head. "No, this is only my second time. We're going to see my grandpa. He's sick." Her lower lip trembled, just for a moment, but Mom says we have to be brave for him. There was the small crack in her strength, something deeply human and vulnerable. Daniel's heart tightened. "I'm sorry," he said. "That must be hard." She nodded. "It is, but I think maybe sometimes people need someone to sit with them when they're scared, like I'm sitting with you." His chest tightened again, this time with something gentler, warmer. "You think I'm scared?" "I know you are," she said. "You were clenching your fists, and you kept taking tiny breaths instead of big ones. Mom calls those worry breaths." He hadn't realized he was doing either. "And what do you think I should do?" he asked, curious what an 8-year-old solution would be to a multi-million-dollar disaster. She didn't hesitate. "Take a big breath, then choose the thing that feels most like love, even if it's hard." "The thing that feels like love?" She looked up at him, as if amazed he didn't already know. "Yes, that's the thing that fixes people." He stared at her, stunned by how simple and impossible her advice was at the same time. He wondered how his board would react if he entered the crisis meeting and said he'd been guided by a child with a crayon and a philosophy about love. But a tiny voice inside him whispered that maybe that was exactly what he needed. The plane rattled slightly as mild turbulence brushed through the cabin. Passengers shifted nervously. Lila, however, sat still, gripping the armrest only briefly before looking at Daniel. "Are you scared of turbulence?" she asked. "No," he said, though he was slightly. "Good," she said, exhaling. "Because I'm trying not to be scared, and if you weren't scared, then maybe I can copy you." He smiled at her bravery. "I promise we're safe." She let out a breath, nodding. "My mom says fear is loud, but courage whispers. You have to listen close." Another sentence that felt like it came from someone far older than 8. The turbulence eased quickly, and she relaxed again, resuming her coloring. Daniel watched the way her small hand moved, steady and patient. Every stroke seemed deliberate. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't worrying about perfection. She was simply creating because it made her happy. He wondered when he had stopped doing anything for that reason. Minutes passed. A flight attendant came by offering snacks. Lila took a small packet of cookies and glanced at Daniel's untouched water. "You should drink that," she advised. Grown-ups forget to take care of themselves. I've noticed, he said dryly. She opened her cookies and held them out to him. Want one? He raised an eyebrow. You're sharing your cookies with me? She nodded seriously. My mom says sharing makes the heart feel lighter. He accepted one, feeling unexpectedly honored by the offer. It was a simple act, but it struck him as more genuine than anything he'd experienced in weeks. He realized with a quiet shock that he felt calm, even hopeful. Lila finished her snack and wiped her hands carefully on the napkin. Then she turned to him again, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. What are you going to do when you land? He hesitated. I'm supposed to go to a meeting. Supposed to, she repeated. Yes, it's important. Is it important for your heart? The question hit him like a slow, deep echo. I don't know. You should know, she said gently. Hearts don't like being ignored. He let out a breath, rubbing his temples. It's complicated. Oh. She nodded sagely. Mom says that word when she wants to say something hurts. Daniel blinked, startled by the accuracy. Well, he admitted softly, yes, it hurts. She reached out again, placing her small hand on his wrist this time. Her touch was warm, grounding. Maybe it's time to fix the hurting thing. He looked at her, this little girl who somehow understood him better than people he paid 6 figures to advise him. How? He whispered. She smiled, small and luminous. You already started. You're talking. And something in him cracked again, not in pain this time, but in release. Talking. When had he last let himself be human with someone? When had he last allowed himself to be vulnerable without turning it into weakness? Lila leaned her head against the seat. I like talking to you, she said quietly. You're kind, even though you look serious. He chuckled softly. I didn't know I looked serious. You do, like your face forgot how to smile. He touched his cheek without thinking. Maybe it did. Well, she said with a tiny grin, I can teach it. And she reached over with both hands and gently pushed his cheeks upward into a smile. He laughed, loud, free, surprising even himself. Several passengers turned to look, confused by the sudden sound of joy. Lila giggled, proud of herself. See, she said, your face remembers. Daniel wiped a small tear that had escaped without permission. Thank you, he whispered, more to the universe than to her. For what? For reminding me. She leaned closer. Of what? But before he could answer, a voice crackled over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look out the left side of the aircraft, you'll see the first glimpse of the Chicago skyline. The passengers stirred, craning their necks to catch the view. Lila pressed her nose to the window with excitement, her breath fogging the glass. Daniel watched her. This small force of light who had entered his life by accident, or perhaps by something more mysterious, and felt the shift inside him settle into something clear, profound, and unstoppable. And as Chicago drew closer beneath them, glowing like a promise waiting to be kept, Daniel turned back to Lila, ready to answer the question she had asked. The moment Daniel opened his mouth to answer Lila, the plane dipped slightly, beginning its gentle descent toward Chicago. The city glittered below like a constellation that had fallen to earth, rivers of gold threading between towers of glass. As the skyline grew clearer, Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Something he hadn't felt in far too long. Direction. Of what? Lila asked again, her eyes wide with expectation. He met her gaze, a strange tenderness filling every corner of him. Of who I used to be, he said softly, and who I still can be. Before she could respond, her mother appeared at the aisle, leaning forward between seats. Lila, she called gently, we're landing soon. Come sit up front with me. Lila nodded, but she didn't move right away. She was studying Daniel, her little brow furrowed with a seriousness that made her look almost ancient. She reached out and pressed a drawing she'd made, the sun pushing through uneven clouds into his hands. Keep this, she whispered, for when it gets dark again. His throat tightened. Thank you, he murmured, but the words felt small compared to the impact she had made. She slid out of her seat, but just before she stepped away, she turned back and held his gaze. Don't forget what your heart sounded like today. He didn't answer. He couldn't. All he could do was watch her small form move up the aisle, curls bouncing with every step, until she disappeared into the forward rows. Moments later, the plane touched down. The wheels struck the runway with a thud that vibrated through Daniel's bones like the beginning of something, not the end. The passengers stood, muttering and reaching for luggage, but he remained still, the drawing in his hand. Sunlight breaking through clouds, reminding him of a truth he had ignored for years. Storms don't stay forever. As the cabin emptied out, Daniel stepped into the aisle, suddenly uncertain. Should he find the girl again? Thank her mother? Say something more? But when he reached the front of the plane, she was already gone, vanished into the river of rushing passengers, as if she were never meant to stay long. Outside the terminal, cold wind slapped his face awake. His driver held open the door of the black sedan, but Daniel hesitated. Through the glass wall of the airport, he caught a glimpse of Lila and her mother standing at the baggage claim. Her mom was crouched down, wiping something from Lila's cheek. Lila, in turn, was nodding vigorously, as if encouraging her mother instead of seeking comfort. That tiny act told Daniel everything. Her wisdom wasn't magic. It was inherited, grown from a home that had chosen courage, kindness, and honesty even in the face of pain. He turned from the sedan and walked back inside the airport. He didn't approach them. He didn't interrupt their moment. He simply watched Lila cling to her mother's arm and offer the same light she'd offered him. And then, for the first time in a long time, he felt something like humility, pure, real grounding. A reminder that leadership wasn't born in boardrooms. It was born in human hearts. He pulled out his phone and dialed his assistant. "Cancel the crisis meeting," he said. "Sir," the assistant's voice cracked. "Cancel? But the board." "Reschedule it," Daniel said firmly. "In a different room, with every department represented, not just the executives. And tell everyone there's going to be a new approach." A new approach to what? To everything. He ended the call before she could respond and headed toward the exit. His car followed as he walked, but he didn't get in. Instead, he made his way through downtown Chicago on foot, letting the cold burn clarity into him. He passed office workers rushing home, street musicians fighting the chill with warm melodies, and children dragging parents toward lit shop windows. Every face he saw felt like a reminder of the humanity he had forgotten in himself. Then, outside a small cafe, he stopped. A father was crouched beside a crying toddler, kissing her forehead and whispering something soft that made her smile through her tears. Something about that tenderness sliced through Daniel's chest, tearing open the last remnants of numbness. He stepped away from the window and stared at the sky. The clouds looked just like Lila's drawing, uneven, imperfect, but letting in light. He took a deep breath, the kind she had told him to take. A full breath, a brave breath. The next morning, the crisis meeting began differently than any meeting his company had hosted before. Every employee, from interns to department heads, sat together. The board entered with stiff shoulders and wary expressions. The atmosphere was thick with fear, frustration, uncertainty. Then Daniel stepped forward, not with a rehearsed speech, not with a plan polished by consultants, but with truth. He told them about the scandal, about the mistakes, about the failure of leadership, his leadership. He told them he had forgotten the heart of the company, the people who gave it life. He told them he wanted to rebuild from the inside out with transparency, empathy, and shared decision-making. He didn't quote statistics. He didn't promise miracles. He simply spoke like a human being. And because of that, for the first time in months, the room didn't fracture. It united. Plans were made. Voices were heard. Ideas sparked. A culture shifted. By the end of the day, the impossible seemed possible again. But the real ending came weeks later, when a small envelope arrived at Daniel's office addressed in uneven, childish handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a new drawing, the same sun, the same clouds. But this time, the sky was clearer and the sun was bigger, brighter, rising. There was only one line written beneath it. Night never wins forever. Lila, Daniel set the drawing on his desk and felt warmth bloom in his chest. She had changed everything, not with power, not with influence, not with money, but with truth, innocence, and a courage that whispered rather than shouted. And from that day forward, every decision he made echoed with the same quiet question from a little girl on a plane. Is it important for your heart? And because he answered honestly, the company didn't just survive, it transformed. And so did he. Because sometimes the smallest stranger becomes the biggest turning point of your life. And sometimes the sky really does hold you up